and it'll just sit there in the queue and it'll be answered first if you ask early. So we highly recommend that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Paul. And yes, definitely a good reminder on the questions. As Paul said, with everything going on and so much focus around the changes that are happening in identity at the moment, I thought it would be really good for us to just cover a little bit of background on this topic, a little bit about how Beeswax is preparing and helping our customers with this, and a few different strategies that some of our customers are using to be effective in terms of performance, even without using some of the user data. And so before we get started, as Paul said, I'm Cadi Jones. I run Beeswax's EMEA business, so Europe, Middle East and Africa, and I'm based in not so sunny today, London. So thank you for joining us today. I think it's always good to start with just a reminder that the promise of digital advertising was really this idea of one-to-one targeting. And when you say one-to-one targeting, you know, everyone thinks about retargeting. Everyone thinks about being able to communicate with a particular person who's in a particular target audience group for that, whether that's socio-demographic, whether it's behavioural, or whether it's based on other data signals. But all of those have effectively relied on identity, being able to determine who that user is, to be able to then put them in a group and target them effectively. And obviously with the announcements we mentioned in the beginning, the changes happening right now in terms of the IDFA going away with the iOS 14 changes, but also the changes that are coming in Chrome to the third-party cookie, means that this is a really, really hot topic. I took this slide from some work that Prohaska consultants have released for the MMA, really just to flag that it is a big challenge for our industry, but with any challenge, there are people who want to make it seem more complicated. So just as the Lumascape is designed to make the whole ad tech ecosystem seem very difficult, there are lots and lots of company names that have been put on this list to make it seem like something that is very, very difficult. Lots of companies are seeing this as an opportunity to provide a solution. But hopefully most of the folks joining this call today, I think, are from the buy side, and most people will understand really that the reason we care about identity and targeting is around performance of campaigns. And so today, as I said, we'll tuck in a little bit of an overview about how Beeswax is thinking about this topic, perhaps a little bit broader about optimization and performance, and then come into some other elements that you could consider if performance of your digital media campaigns is really important to you. So let's start with a little bit about Beeswax and our approach. And I think it's really helpful to start by thinking about what is identity really used for within digital marketing. And I think you can broadly bracket things under three big headings. Really, it's around targeting. It's about measurement and attribution. And then the one that people frequently forget is frequency capping. And that's really important because you do want to make sure your money is spent efficiently. You do want to remove wastage. You don't want to overexpose particular audiences. So frequency capping is one that can be forgotten, but it's good to think about. And I think if you think about each of those separately, so targeting, measurement and attribution, and then frequency capping, it might be that you don't necessarily need exactly the same approach for each of these. Perhaps you can have a different solution or something else that works for each of those. And so Beeswax's support is now our approach is really to support best-in-class solutions for our customers here. We've decided as Beeswax not to develop our own identity solution, and instead, at the moment, we already support some of the universal IDs with the LiveRamp IDL being fully integrated. It's likely that we will have support for more of the universal IDs coming fairly soon. There are probably actually I'm not going to say any numbers, but there are a few kind of obvious candidates there that will be approaching in due course, and you should keep an eye on product release notes. Talk to a sales director or your client success manager for more detail about what may be coming on the roadmap there. Something that's quite unique to Beeswax is this idea of being able to use a custom ID space. And that's really a capability that's set up and we've developed to enable any customers, any buyers with their own ID to use that to control their targeting, their frequency capping, their measurement and attribution. I think it makes most sense that it's coming and involved from the publisher side, but there's no reason why it couldn't also be from the brand side. Anyone who's got that access to first-party data at scale that makes it meaningful for their buying. We have a lot of documentation around how this works, and be happy to share that with you if that's interesting. But obviously, I know that's not necessarily relevant for everyone. You know, not everyone will have the ability to have that first party identifier to use. There's a final element that I wanted to include here, though, is the idea that it may make sense to use some of these identifiers in combination. So, for example, with frequency capping, we've developed the possibility to actually use a combination of identifiers. And so, for example, you could set a rule that is, you know, frequency cap based on a cookie ID. If a cookie ID is not present, fall back to one of the universal IDs, or if that's not present, fall back to the IP address that we're seeing on that bid request. Its IP address is obviously not quite as accurate necessarily as an individual user, but it does ensure that you're still having a good enough level of accuracy for frequency capping. And so, as I said, these solutions really help for identity, but I think it's really important for us to think about, why do we care so much about identity? What's really important here? Because identity is really used to power optimization. And so I think it's interesting to think about, well, how else can we think about optimization? How else can I think about getting the performance that I need? So I know everyone loves a definition slide. I always think it's really important to include a bit of background in terms of what do we mean by optimization, because this can all seem pretty daunting. But what we're really meaning here is focusing investment, and that means time as well as money in terms of the time where the team is spent, but money in terms of what you're developing, what you're working on, as well as the actual advertising spend. So focusing your investment on the elements that are really working well, and less where it's not. And I think something that we see as fairly often being overlooked, where people are so focused on identity and on personalization, on user IDs, is worth considering more of the inventory factors that are present on a bid request. So where we see a bid request coming into Beeswax, there are I think just over 120 fields that can be filled in on a bid request. Around 40 of those are very regularly completed, all with factors that relate to the industry. The bidder can be set up to use them, and these have really strong correlation with the results that you can actually see for a campaign. But what needs to happen can vary hugely by advertiser. So just to give a few examples, a few ideas of what sort of inventory factors, what we might mean by those inventory factors. I've illustrated here with this idea around the site, the exchange, the time of day, and then I've sort of broadly said, like, there are lots of other factors that come in, as we said, up to sort of 40 or so, kind of fairly regularly. It's worth noting that these inventory factors will represent 70 to 80% of the results that any algorithm is getting. And I intentionally included the exchange detail here because the exact same site might behave very, very differently, perhaps with different floor prices, different fees, different sections of inventory even that are available via different exchanges. And that's particularly important in some markets, but it's worth looking at sort of globally. We actually have a case study on our website for the programmatic company who actually don't use user-based factors for their optimization. They solely use inventory factors and have seen really, really good performance from their bidder. And what's really important about this, I've sort of, in this example, I've highlighted these all as individual different components. But where we really see it being, see best performance being delivered is where you're actually not thinking about them as separate elements, but thinking about the different inventory factors in combination, and that can really drive better results for your campaign. So in this example here, looking at combining the domain with the geo, thinking about the time of the day and the operating system, and thinking about the exact combination of those results, determining your bid price, rather than just any one of them causing you to inflate your bid too much. So I really thought it was important just to underline thinking about inventory factors, but we did tee up that we would also cover a little bit about data augmentation, because this is a tool that our customers frequently deploy. It's something that's really unique to Beeswax, but it's a mechanism whereby you can bring some of your more of data to the auction in real time. So very simply, in terms of what does a data augmenter actually do? Well, we receive the bid requests into Beeswax from the exchanges over on the left-hand side of my screen. Based on each of our customers' different filtering instructions, we ensure the right auctions, the right bid requests make it to their bidder. A data augmenter is effectively your opportunity to then add something to that incoming bid request in real time. You're typically using a simple key value lookup mechanism with a very short latency window to do this. So you're looking at 10 milliseconds, but this is effectively your opportunity to find something in the original bid request, look at the original bid request, see something that you recognize, look it up in this key value pair, so find the matching code, the matching segment, the matching key that you want to add into the auction. And then you can target that custom segment, you can target that data immediately in real time. And some of the things that we see our customers using, I mean, it can really be any kind of type of data. On the first slide, I showed that big Lumascape-esque slide at the beginning. Contextual data is something that comes up a lot. So a customer looking up the URL, comparing that URL to their understanding of what that context is on that page, and then adding that bid request, adding a tag to that bid request they can target in real time to define the context of that page. We see custom geo databases coming up very regularly, so people understanding more about the physical world and wanting to include that. So this slide always makes me laugh with the the first party user data enrichment. These are bees. Believe I thought they were bunny rabbits at one point, but they're not happy and sad bunny rabbits. They are bees. And so if you do have first party data, if there is a user ID present, whether that's a universal ID or a cookie or a mobile device ID, you can then add a segment, add an indication to the bid request that you can then target based on what those users mean to you, and so you can do that in real time. And then coming back to that inventory piece you were talking about, you can even sort of add a score based on the combination of different inventory factors that you're seeing, and then use that to adjust your bidding structure. And so I think it was important to think about this as a way of adding data in real time that might be hot data or cold data. It doesn't necessarily have to be user related data, although it can be. But we also but there's really no limit to what you could include in this, whether it's real-time data, whether it's real world data, or whether it is that first party user information. And now we try to keep these sections quite brief, so that we don't overwhelm people with information, but we do have a lot of other information that might be relevant here. So Paul, I was going to ask you if we could perhaps include a link here to a webinar that Shamim has run previously on introducing the concept of data augmentation in more detail. This is really a much more technical overview of what's available, and it might help if you want to explore that more as a first step. And there's also a webinar that Ari has presented previously, with a lot more information about our approach at Beeswax to the big identity question. So I would also say feel free to talk to your sales director if you're potentially someone who's considering working with us. Feel free to talk to your customer success manager if you're someone who's already a customer about the changes that are coming to the industry and how your business might be impacted and how we can help. I've seen we've had some questions coming in, so I'm keen to get to some of those.
Sure, and I'm going to also distribute this link to a case study we did with the programmatic company that I think shines a light on a lot of these topics here. So I've just sent that through the chat, and while we're answering questions, I'll try to get that link to the Data Augmentors webinar, but it is on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search for Beeswax, you might get some stuff about candles first, but we are in there. I don't think the candle manufacturers are talking about data augmenters, so you can go ahead and search there. All right, the first couple questions I'll just deal with here. They're more like housekeeping stuff. Will you send out the deck and documentation to the person who asked that? We'll reach out to you directly. We generally post videos of these webinars and not the decks directly, but if you have some need for that, we can accommodate that. So thanks for asking the question non-anonymously.
And I'll put my my email up as well. So happy to help with links to the technical documentation as well. But feel free to also ask your customer success manager, your account manager.
Into the first one, and let's just get right into it. If we have a first party data set, are we able to, in real time, query Beeswax to return segments per identifier, i.e. segments for each person within our data set, ideally searching per an email address, for example, but also through an email hash or similar in order to match segments to each identity? Assume this would be going through Beeswax to LiveRamp and others, question mark?
That's a chunky question without seeing it written down. I am going to see if I can see the questions here, but yes. We don't have a sort of clean room technology ourselves to be able to perform the email hash. But if, for example, it was present, you were working with a partner like LiveRamp, we would potentially you would potentially be able to use that data augmenter to look up against that identifier and layer additional data in real time. I can see you asked the question anonymously, but perhaps you can also follow up, and we'd be happy to just share some documentation about how that would work, and perhaps talk through it in a bit more detail.
Next question, can campaign performance really be driven by inventory factors?
You know, it's such a good question, because I think so much of what we talk about in programmatic has been predicated on this idea of one-to-one. You know, everything has to be user-based. I think, Paul, did you share the link for the programmatic company's case study?
In the chat, so anybody who'd like to read more on how this is actually working in practice, not just in theory, can go ahead and read that case study.
Because I think they switched their campaigns to us from another DSP who I won't mention here, and their performance improved by 25% simply by looking at those inventory factors and taking them into account in combination. So yes, you can do it.
So let's dovetail that into another hot topic. We have a question here. Are there any privacy concerns here? And one of the things that strikes me about the way they're doing things is by using inventory factors, you're completely removing it from the identity of the person. You know, it's got nothing to do with them. So can you talk a little bit more about how using data augmenters is actually, you know, more consumer privacy friendly?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because privacy is something that we take very, very seriously at Beeswax, and within the Freewheel, and within the Comcast group. So the concept of a data augmenter allows you to add that information into the bid request in real time. You're not necessarily you're not sharing the data with a third-party DMP, and then that third-party DMP is not uploading the data into Beeswax system, or sharing that with Beeswax in any way. It can be entirely codified. So you see a user identifier in a bid request, and you look it up against your first-party data, and you can say this user is in segment 1, 2, 3, 4. Your trader can target that user in real time. So if you were a bank or a telco, or someone who's subject to much stricter privacy regulation, it's a way to still be able to target your first party data in real time without going through those extra third party platform hoops. Not only that, it's also real time. You're doing it as the bid request comes in 10 milliseconds. So there's some advantage there around just around speed as well, especially if you're in an industry where time is of the essence. To Paul's point, though, if you're purely looking at inventory factors and you're disregarding the user information entirely, then obviously that's a very privacy safe route to take. So I think it's going to vary a lot based on your individual use case and sort of capabilities, and your first party data as well.
Speaking of first party data, I'm going to skip around just a little bit. There is a question about, what does Beeswax stance in terms of supporting first party IDs in the bid stream? Do you intend to support all or just some, is the question.
Oh, it's a good point. I could do with a tiny bit more context if this hadn't been an anonymous question. So in terms of first-party IDs in the bid stream, we do, I think it's public knowledge for us to say, we do intend to support more of the universal IDs than we do currently. Right now, we have full support of LiveRamp IDL. We will move to support further identifiers. In terms of a customer passing their first party ID in, and that custom ID space kind of capability, that's something that doesn't we have one route to be able to pass, and we're obviously checking then that customer is included, assuming we're in Europe, within the consent string. So checking that they do have they're adding that data and checking they have the consent to use that data. But be happy to take any follow-up questions on that use case.
Katie's email address if you'd like to follow up. I'm going to jump around again because I like this question. Because I feel like I know something about it, having watched so many of our other webinars and hosted them. But this person's asking, I love the idea of inventory scoring. How would you look to set something like this up? By looking at historic factors and their influence on performance? I think the subjective factors are also interesting, time of day, creative size, etc. Well, we've done a lot of talking about antenna. Is that something that maybe is coming into play here, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so yes, you would, in all likelihood, you would look at the. I'm trying to find the question again. You would look at the historic data for what's performing for you, and look at what are the different factors that do come through in the bid stream, that inventory factors that can influence or that do influence the performance of your campaigns. Paul mentioned that we have an offering which we call Antenna, always with the B puns, and that's effectively making it much easier for you to access your data. So not just necessarily the win logs, the log level data for the impressions that you have bid on and won, but also loss logs, looking also even potentially at not only win logs, loss logs and bid logs, but also even potentially at auction logs, so that you can really start to understand what are the inventory factors that are driving performance. We can share those log files with you as raw logs, either in real time or batched. But we can also make them available, make them queryable, available to you, so in a way where you can query them in real time using SQL, but without you having to host and store those logs. So there's lots of different capabilities with Beeswax on how you could access that data. But I think the most important point is we believe it's your data. When we're giving you your own individual bidder, we believe that the data behind that is your data. Obviously, if you're not in the consent string, then anything that is personal data would be obfuscated or hashed, so that obviously to make sure that we are following all of the relevant regulations.
Next question, with regards to data augmentation, could an example be increasing the bid price because a person has been identified as someone who opened an email or engaged with our app, assuming we have this info in our first party data?
That would be a perfect sort of data augmentation, yes, to add a user to a particular, add a particular code to that bid request to indicate that this is someone who has, previously bought this from you or has previously engaged with an email. And you can even then use that custom segment in combination with segment recency. Wait, can you do that? Actually, that's something I would need to check, but that would be an interesting use case. Sorry, I'm just talking in theory, but how long ago had they taken that action? I'm not sure actually if you're doing it through a data augmenter, if we would have that information or not. So that is part of what I just said there, but certainly yes to your first question. Yes, you absolutely could add a sort of email engagement as a flag, assuming that you had that first party information.
Like a speculative question, so we'll do our best in answering it. But what gaps in attribution will exist in the second half of 2021 that didn't previously? And are there any environments, for example, open web display, that are more affected than others?
Oof. I think it's a tough question to answer. What I would say at the moment as the best way to analyze this is take a look at what you are doing currently in Safari or in Firefox. And it's if you have a look what's happening in those environments, you'll be able to then see the impacts that will happen onwards in as Chrome rolls out the cookie apocalypse for even further. I think you're potentially right. I think attribution is going to go through a very, very big overhaul, and there are lots of different routes that might take for different customers. But I think that's one that probably needs a glass of wine rather than a glass of water, and a bit longer for us to cover.
As like a general answer to, so we are getting some questions about various different changes that are going to be made to the ecosystem and identity solutions, and big companies that are rolling out certain things. All of these things are things that we at Beeswax and Freewheel are looking into. We have an interoperability thesis where we want to partner with the ecosystem. So we have working groups working on all of these things. Not much we can say at this moment. We are part of a large company now. But we appreciate the questions. All right, so that it really is the end of the Q&A. We want to thank everyone for submitting their really thoughtful questions. There were a good number that were anonymous, so if you'd like to follow up and get more personalized answers and dig into some of these issues, that is what we're here for. So please email Cadi@beeswax.com with your concerns, and we will get back to you. She'll get back to you as soon as she can, I'm sure. So Cadi, thank you so much for hosting this and for being such a good sport and hosting a lot of these. Thank you, the audience, for joining. We hope everybody is healthy, happy, and safe, and we will see you again soon. Take care.